you start losing track of where the movie's headed. But nevertheless, I think uh, the performance played by the characters shine throughout the film, and it can offset any of the mistakes you may see in there. Specifically Delroy Lindo, followed by Jonathan Majors, and even Clark Peters. I think this is the first film that Spike has had where he's had four lead actors over the age of 50, including Norm Lewis, carry this movie all the way. And there's a lot that you can take off from this film. Um, he certainly has action in there without giving too much spoilers away. There's a lot in there, but there's a lot that he says about war, and it's about friendship, and it's about fatherhood between a father and son. And there's a lot of elements in this movie that work in some areas. Technically speaking, you can argue against some things that he did not shoot as a filmmaker, that you would have thought he would have had, considering he's being funded by Netflix. Um, but that's neither here or there, especially when you're getting it for free on Netflix. You're not going to quibble with a lot of different things.
Well, I think
But
you're referring
overall,
to the fact that like the film, even though I think it looks great, is still not as big budget of a movie as say The Irishman, right, or something
Right,
like that.
right.
yes, yeah,
And
without
the
pulling, yeah,
and there's been a
you
lot of
know,
talk about how because he didn't have that budget, he couldn't de-age the characters for flashbacks, right? And so what?
exactly.
Has he said he wanted to do that? I felt like that was a choice.
I think
No,
they
he never
turned
did.
a disadvantage. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Wilson.
I actually spoke to Spike Lee last week as part of a press conference, and it was a matter of like when it asked that question, it's like, why not bring in younger actors to play these roles and de-age them? He said he didn't have the budget for it. Netflix wouldn't want to do it. I think it cost Scorsese what 100 million just to do that process. And they weren't going to do it with Spike Lee.
Yeah. It also
Um,
took forever for Scorsese too, right?
yeah, so that would have been too much to do. Um, and he also didn't want, and if he had brought in younger actors, to take a spotlight away from the four leads that he had. You know, so he thought he had these guys and they was gonna roll with it no matter what. Um, and you can make that quite towards the end. I won't say much in there because I don't want to make it a spoiler. But yeah, so that's a process that that could have been worked out, but nevertheless, it's not too big of a deal.
Yeah, I think he took what the discourse I've seen online is that he took a disadvantage and made it
Hmm.
into an advantage, which is that it's actually a really interesting choice to not have them de-aged at all, to not hire younger actors, because you get
Right.
the feeling that for these characters, they're still living what happened
Hmm.
to them decades ago, and
And by,
and
by the way, that is pretty much his entire career, isn't it? Just turning every disadvantage into something that's super. Like this guy has never had a $100 million movie, right? I feel like that's the constant story we keep hearing. Every movie for Spike Lee is like a fight, even a big epic like Malcolm X, to produce and to get it made. He's always scrapping around for funding. So yeah, this is not unusual, but it's a shame when you see, The Irishman come in with next gen computer graphics to, make these older actors younger, and this movie is like, whatever, let's just do it.
Do we know if this movie cost 100 million or probably not? Not
No,
when
no,
shooting
no,
here
no,
now.
no, no. Yeah, it's. I mean, it's certainly cheaper to shoot, um,
it
in
was
Asia.
around 35 to 45 million
Yeah,
dollars is what the production budget of The Five Bloods is. But it is amongst Lee's most expensive movies. So
yeah.
um,
Did you guys see who the initial cast was for the movie?
yeah, I heard it was like Denzel, right? Was supposed to be one of the leads. Is that
It
right?
was Giancarlo Esposito, Sam Jackson, Denzel Washington, and John David Washington.
Oh man, that would have been something.
That would
But
have been a
I
hundred
still
million
like
dollar
this.
movie.
The whole
Yeah, it would have been a
movie,
whole
but
different movie. Yeah.
Is
yeah.
there an explanation as to why that didn't happen?
Timing,
Hmm.
obviously, when you have a core cast like that, and Giancarlo was, he's the one that put out the names, he said timing is everything, and Giancarlo was filming Godfather of Harlem, and Sam is always making a movie, and John David Washington was, I think, filming Tenet. So like they
Mm.
couldn't get it together to start shooting this.
Let me ask you one last question, Wilson, before I throw it to some of my other co-hosts, which is you're talking about like this isn't too much of a departure from Spike Lee isms. I actually think in terms of Spike Lee isms, it's relatively restrained. I mean, there are some shots and elements from other Spike Lee films that I definitely recognize here. Like characters standing on a platform that's attached to the camera as it moves towards you.
The dolly shot.
Yeah, yeah.
The increasingly frequent use in his movies of like real footage from the actual world that we live in, right? Archival footage. This was very obvious in Black Klansman as well. But A, I thought it was relatively restrained. I'm curious what you think about that. But B, it sounds like the way you're describing it is it feels a little bit played out to you. Am I hearing that right? Or what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think everything is timing. So like it worked with Black Klansman, uh, and you never know where because of what's happening in life how this movie will play out, and considering what's happening now, it's still relevant now. When he throws it in there. If had he done this 5 years ago, it would have seemed more like a gimmick. But when you see what's happening in today's world, it's timely. So everything happens for a reason. So when he shot Black Klansman and he had that scene of what happened in Virginia at the end, who knew a year later that it would still become timely?
Yeah.
And so here, when he throws in and talks about how blacks have been treated, look what's happening now. You just never know how these things played out, and especially being it's being shown now at this time period where he gets more eyes on it. Whereas in normal situation, we're in June. You probably would have had the NBA championships going on. You would have had a bigger movie in theaters, and it's the summertime, so you probably wouldn't have had that many eyes on it, especially when people hear 2.5 hours. But because we have no sports, we have no movies in theaters, and it's the only thing that Spike's always going to get you interested to see his movies. And before, when you say 2.5 hours is too much, you got plenty of time to watch it at home now.
Yeah, indeed. All right. So overall, it sounds like you're a fan of this movie, yeah?
Yeah, I am. I think you can always sit back and watch it. And I think the characters itself, stand out. Delroy Lindo, Clark Peters. We've seen them mostly play character actors in other projects. Delroy actually was the lead. This is his fourth time in a Spike Lee film. Second time as a lead. He was the lead in Crooklyn. And then for Isaiah Whitlock Jr., this is his sixth film with Spike Lee. And I'm trying to think who else is. Jonathan Majors is the newcomer. Chadwick Boseman is the newcomer. This Norm Lewis had appeared in She's Gotta Have It, one of Spike Lee's Netflix projects in there. And then Clark Peters was the lead in The Sweet Blood of Jesus. So he's had, so when he's had actors he's worked with before, you don't have to worry about what they're going to give because we've seen them perform. And I think they all brought in their A game in terms of showing on the screen, the chemistry between them as former comrades.
Got it. Hey, let's take a pause real quick. Hey, Wilson, you're sounding awesome. Can you do me a favor? Do you have the window up that the Zencastr is in?
I have the window. Yeah.
Yeah.
What am I looking for?
Can you just do me a favor? You know how next to your name there's a little microphone icon?
Yeah.
Can you just click on that and mute yourself when you're not talking? And anytime you want to interrupt or come in, just unmute and welcome into the conversation. But just like when you're not muting, I still can hear a little bit of background noise. Is that cool?
Yeah, it's still hearing us.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, I
Yeah,
can
so
definitely do that.
Just mute yourself when you're not talking. But whenever you want to talk, if anything comes to your mind, unmute yourself. We'd be happy to hear you. Okay. And then one last thing. At the end of this broadcast, I'm gonna I'm gonna say like, hey, that's the Slash Filmcast. See you later. Do not shut off the computer right then, because we need you to actually stay online to upload the audio. Is that right, Jeff?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
The browser will just do it automatically.
Yeah. So just like
It'll do-
don't.
it should take mere seconds.
Yeah, it'll take seconds. So just don't like when I say like see you later. Just don't close the window until after I meant to mention this beforehand, but I make sure
The
I
fatal
got it.
flaw of Zencaster. Yeah.
Okay.
There's ways
cool.
to get around that, but
Mhm,
All right.
mhm.
Okay. So, Devinger Hardware, tell us what you thought of The Five Bloods.
Oh, I absolutely loved it, and I feel like partially a matter of timing too, because I was just working my way through Malcolm X right before this, and then to start this movie and just see Delroy Lindo in it again, looking like nothing has changed since the early '90s. Like this guy's so good. And for me, I've been talking about The Good Fight, the CBS show, for a long time. He's a star of that show, and he's kicking ass. And like he's an actor I've loved forever, and I always love seeing him in things. And this movie feels like, God damn, give this man an Oscar. Like he is doing some incredible work here. And his character, I love his character. I love everything about this movie, but I specifically love what Delroy Lindo is doing and how he's working out his own form of PTSD, how that's turned him into basically a Trump voter, and how that's kind of alienated him from everybody around him. I love all that. And yeah, it's a very timely, piece on how America treats Black people for sure, and also how America goes to war and the power of war. It's funny for me to see there's the scene of the Viet Cong radio broadcaster just addressing the Black soldiers, saying, what are you doing? We're not in this fight, we're not really fighting each other. And Watchmen did the same exact thing with the Nazis, which was actual broadcast too, so that's kind of propaganda used both ways. But to see that
we
kind
should
of
we should
pop
be
back
clear
up
what you're
again-
we should just be clear what you're saying.
Yeah.
The HBO original series Watchmen,
yes
the Damon Lindelof one, had a scene in which Nazis dropped flyers on Black soldiers saying
Yep.
like, "Hey, we will treat you better than your own.
we're not
country."
your enemy.
Yeah, we're not your enemy. Like your country is your enemy, basically. Yeah. So
Mhm.
that's it's a very kind of a parallel to what happens in this movie, The Five Bloods, in which
Mhm.
you hear Vietnamese broadcasts that explain why America is bad, that are directly addressing Black soldiers in this movie.
And to have all this land too in the middle of the Black Lives Matter protests and just everything happening right now, this just really feels like the movie of the moment. I loved it, even the excesses of it, which I'm sure we'll talk about in spoilers, but it's fantastic. I love seeing Spike Lee like back on a roll, because I think for a while, not sure if you guys saw The Sweet Blood of Jesus, but man, I kind of hate that movie. But he's been really working hard to like crowdfund a lot of movies. So there was that, there was Red Hook Summer, there was Chirac, which Chirac's all right, and then Old Boy, which I think we even reviewed. Man, that movie still exists. It's
It was
hard
ru-
to even fathom that.
That was rough. I did not
That
like
was
that.
super rough. So he's had a kind of a rough run, and now with Black Klansman and now this, I am very happy to see like him back in a up and running in a good way.
All right, Jeff Kanata, what are your thoughts on The Five Bloods?
well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts about the Five Bloods are best summed up in the form of a limerick.
Maybe we should explain to Wilson what is going on
Please
with
do.
because we don't want people to think
Yeah.
we're trivializing the
No.
movie.
In fact,
In
when I
any way.
say best summed up, probably not actually, probably worst summed up. But
Wow.
I find myself with my arms tied by none other than our own Dave Bartholomew Chen, who has mandated, nay, threatened that every episode of the Slash Filmcast must have a limerick. And so I find myself with no choice to hold together with rubber bands and bubble gum this rickety podcast by sheer will, by sheer rhyming will. Does that explain it?
I think that explains it. All right, hit
I
us
just
with
want to see how you rhyme Defy Bloods.
hit us
so-
with your limerick for Defy Bloods, Jeff.
This is interesting because it's kind of what Devendra said too. Not proud of this one. Just so you know.
Okay. I'm nervous
Well,
now.
The America we see out our window, still fighting wars it shouldn't be in, though this film's commentary is a little bit buried. I'd still give the Oscar to Lindo.
Nice.
Oh yeah,
Excellent.
we are simpatico right now. It's
Excellent.
perfect.
Excellent. Jeff.
It is an Oscar-worthy performance. He's extraordinary. I also love Clark Peters. He
So good.
is
Yeah.
I could watch that dude read the phone book. Always
Which we
loved
did.
it. Like,
We did do that in The Wire. We just watched him read a phone book for a while.
it's kind of true. He's great. Okay, the performances are great. I think this movie operates on two levels. One is a historical lesson that connects dots for the viewer and really demonstrates some things that are too often overlooked or ignored or not talked about when the history of this time period is discussed. And that part of the movie, that dot connection, that informational relationship between events and how blacks were treated in the Vietnam War, and all of that historical stuff where we see these often harrowing images, real life images flash up on the screen. That stuff to me was my favorite part of the movie. It really made me think about Vietnam and America, as you guys said, in this moment now of history we are living through, especially in a new way. And it forced me to really consider angles that I don't think any other Vietnam movie has done. And for that, I think it is extraordinary. The second level upon which this movie works is sort of this thriller. It's really one of my favorite genres is what I call the best laid plans movies.
Right. The war heist movie. Sure.
Well, not war heist specifically,
Yeah.
but best laid plans, where it's like,
Yes.
here's the plan, and then watch as things just slowly spiral out of control. I love movies like that. A Simple Plan is like a perfect exemplar of that, where you've got people who try to do the right thing, not to pun a Spike Lee movie, but try to be smart in a situation, and things just keep getting worse. I love movies like that. I find them so fun in such a juicy way. Judgment Night, honestly, that we reviewed recently, is kind of like that. Where it's like, hey, let's just get off this exit, and then things can go bad. Best laid plans movies. Okay, for a best laid plan movie to work, in my opinion, for me, I want to really believe that everybody is doing the smartest thing they can do in that situation. And in this movie, I understand we're dealing with people who are dealing with very heavy emotions and PTSD and things that have stuck with them for a long time. But too often, I just thought, if we could all just take a second, everything could be solved. Like if we could all just slow down for a moment here, none of this needs to be happening. And I get that that's kind of the point, but it also made for me a rather frustrating narrative experience. Like I said, I enjoyed the movie on a level of sort of instructional and self-reflection and sort of literally learning facts and learning about a subset of the war that I unfortunately had ignored, right? And I think many of us had, certainly war movies had. But man, I just wish the sort of fundamental human drama layer of it worked better for me. Even at 2.5 hours, there are major plot threads that felt really rushed, that felt really abbreviated and kind of shoehorned in. There are moments, there's a moment that really stuck out to me where they're in Vietnam, they're on this boat, and something happens, and you hear off screen somebody go, "He's got PTSD," and then somebody else goes, "We all have PTSD." And I felt like, with a Hollywood movie, anytime you hear an important line and you don't see the person say it, 99% chance it's ADR, right? So they felt the need.
ADR, for those who don't know, right, being like they added it in after they shot it, basically.
Right. They felt the need to add that line in for clarity. It was an additional dialogue recording. It was an additional line that was recorded later. And it just felt like we're all on the same page. I understand Spike Lee's, I'm sure, desire. It seems to me an honest desire to not allow anything in this movie to be missed or subtle. It needs to be very clear what he's saying. He's beating us over the head in a good way, right? This is advocacy as filmmaking, right? He is saying something. He has a very strong opinion, strong position, and he's presenting that position. And that's what I like about the movie. But there are certain things narratively for the characters that I just felt like you can give us a little credit, and it doesn't need to. Things could have been, I think, expressed more elegantly. There's a lot of dialogue that feels very on the nose, and it didn't feel like the film itself as a narrative device, as a story, was as strong as it could have been from my perspective.
Interesting. Well, I'll share some quick thoughts, and then we can move into spoilers. But I think a lot of that's fair, Jeff. I'll say I really enjoyed the movie because, as you said, it's tackling things, topics, and tackling topics in a way that I just haven't seen before in recent memory, right? I mean, telling the story of African Americans who fought in the Vietnam War, the consequences that had for them, right? Like I can't recall ever having seen that story told on screen before.
Right.
Maybe it has been, and I just have been ignorant to it, and that's very possible. But like I don't know that any movie that has been this widely seen has really dove into that story. And not only that, but also trying to explain in subtle and also non-subtle ways the consequences that the war had in Vietnam. One of the characters refers to it as the American War, and that's also really interesting as well. And you have these two kind of non-white groups who, for reasons we can get into in spoilers, have like different grievances with the American government, right? And I think that's all just really fascinating because we just don't see that side of the story told very much. I think the biggest flaw for the movie, for this movie, is it is just extremely ambitious. And I think that, like you're right,
Yeah.
even at 2.5 hours, I don't know that it quite nails everything it's trying to do. Right? It's trying to be a commentary on American imperialism in foreign countries like Vietnam. It's trying to be a commentary on how the United States subjugates people of color, Black Americans, and uses their labor in very brutal fashion, as we see in the events of this movie. It tries to be about PTSD. It tries to be about the fate of people who are left behind in Vietnam when like soldiers go over there and have children. Like, what happens to those children who are kind of like trapped between worlds of Vietnam and the United States? It tries to be about like how Vietnam has dealt with it. There is an Apocalypse Now bar that's a real life place in the movie. That's depicted in the movie, I should say.
I mean, the Apocalypse Now references are
there's many
constant.
of them. But it's just fascinating to consider the fact that Vietnam has an Apocalypse Now bar.
Yeah,
and
that scene is just fantastic. Like, it is working on so many levels too, of these vets dancing to this thing while young Vietnamese people are jamming out to it, and it's pop culture referencing itself in such an interesting way, I think.
Dude, that scene at the beginning where it's that tracking shot following the four guys as they dance through the thing, I was like, I am going to love this movie. This is so, I love these guys already. I love how this is. I just was like, I'm so in, and it just felt like it didn't Yeah.
So the point I was making is, and on top of that, it tries to be this kind of simple plan-esque thriller, right? Where
It also tries to be about fatherhood,
right, fatherhood
in a
there you
very
go,
real
yeah.
way.
There's a big like father-son relationship. There's tangential characters of people who are like struggling with their own privilege and doing things to atone for their sins. You know, so there's all this stuff going on in this movie, and it tries to be this kind of thriller as well, like things go wrong thriller. On top of all that, and I just don't know that it really aced every single one of those things that I just listed. Which is not to say that it's a bad movie. I actually really enjoyed it. I would strongly
Right.
recommend it. And I think
Yeah, me
Delroy
too.
Lindo is a force of nature in this movie. I do think like everyone's been saying, just hand him the Oscar, get it over with. I would have no
Just do
problem
it.
with that. I think he's awesome in this movie. But yeah, it's one of those movies that is very long, kind of shaggy, and it's just super super ambitious, and it doesn't quite nail everything that it's going for. It doesn't quite ace every single one of those things, and I think that's just understandable given that it's trying to do so much.
Another thing I'll underscore from what you said, Dave, that you kind of brought up that none of the rest of us had yet is how much I enjoyed the photography of Vietnam. Seeing that location as a character is very compelling. It's gorgeous. The end credits are a series of just sort of still locked off camera shots of different locations that you've been through the movie. And I mean, it's just gorgeous. It's a gorgeous place and it's beautifully shot. So I loved that. Like you said, the cafe at or the whatever it is, the dance hall / bar at the beginning. But there are a number of places. There's sort of a place they get through halfway in. That's this like nightclub exterior. Like I want to go to these places. It's a really cool effect of having the scenery itself be a character.
I'll say one last thing about that. Then I want to ask Wilson any closing thoughts before we go to spoilers. But about the look of the movie, very interesting that the movie was shot in 3 different aspect ratios. There is, I might not nail every single one of these, but there's basically like the 16 millimeter. I think it's basically like square format or 4:3 format that is used for all the flashbacks.
Yeah.
There's kind
like
of
old newsreel format.
yeah. There's kind of like modern day. I think it's 16:9, right? Format for modern. No, I'm sorry. It goes to 16:9, and basically the image fills your entire widescreen for the modern for the Vietnam sections, basically like the modern day Vietnam sections, to increase the immersion. And then things that take place like outside of that context are like anamorphic, so there's like black bars at the top and bottom of the screen. So the different aspect ratios to kind of give you a different flavor of each one of the time periods that this movie is in. That's a pretty interesting way to do it, and I appreciated the effect. Wilson, before we get to spoilers for Da 5 Bloods, any closing thoughts? Any reaction to anything we've said about Da 5 Bloods so far?
Yeah, the thing that struck me, and the key word is ambitious. As much as like I said, I like the film, but I also felt like, when I say Spikeisms, it's like the simple narrative is you have 4 individuals who are looking to go back and find a goal, but they use the ruse of their fallen comrade as a way to get back to Vietnam. I think that was a simple narrative, and I don't know if it was originally black, soldiers, but I think when you add Spike in there, he throws in black soldiers. But I think when you have the length of time, he threw a lot of themes in there, like the PF, the post PFTD, if I'm saying it right. You have the father-son relationships. There are a lot of different angles on there. And the question is there enough time spent on these themes for you to walk away satisfied, as opposed to just throwing it in there? So that's what I mean by ambitious, because he wanted to throw I'm not saying he's throwing everything in the kitchen in there, but he's for the most part he's throwing a lot of things in there that doesn't always get solved.
Not to mention he has 5 characters that you're trying to like develop each of these characters and care about each of these characters, and that's a lot harder than if you have like 1 or 2 of them, right? And so it's just super ambitious from that perspective as well.
Yeah, and then obviously there's the Chadwick character. So some things you kind of know going in, or midway you figure out what's going to go. And then you have the secondary characters played by the white folks. I'm forgetting to put it more simpler by the white folks. Like, okay, what is their role in all of this? Like, why are they there? How did they get there? Like, like what's going on here? Like all I need is the five guys. I don't need the rest. It's like that there's a portion in there. You're like, why are we focusing on these people?
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
I hear you.
and it kept going on, and it's like, okay. Sometimes I always wonder, like, Spike Lee can direct, and it's a question of whether or not he has a producer that he has to adhere to that can rein him in, because sometimes he can go overboard, And I think when he had his earlier films like The Sweet Blood of Jesus and his other films that are definitely not favorites. I don't think he had anybody telling him what to do.
Like when he was
Here,
crowdfunding and funding himself in many ways, like it was completely off the rails in many ways.
yeah. So when you have Netflix saying, "Okay, Spike, where are you with this movie?" I think with Black Klansman, he had Jordan Peele. He had a team behind him. Say, okay, we can tighten this up a bit. Here he was able to do it, and he's on a roll right now. There's solid reviews up there. People keep talking about Delroy Lindo, Oscar. I think all four of these guys are leads. None of them are supporting. They're all leads. So it's a question whether or not if you put them all as leads like they did the Irishman in some areas, do they cancel each other out? And because we now know the Oscars are now to next year, April, is there, did they peter out too soon, or will this come back? I think now that we have 10 nominees for Best Picture, unless there's another Black film that comes out, this will probably be up there just for optics purposes.
All right. Well, why don't we dive into spoilers for this movie? I think there's a lot more to discuss. So let's get to spoilers for Da 5 Bloods starting right now. All right. So I'll just say I think, I thought Delroy Lindo was really, really good up until the part where he delivers, I think it's like a 10-minute monologue while he's hiking through the jungle, and that's when it was basically God level for me. So I'm just gonna put that out there. I thought that was amazing.
One take going at it. Yeah.
Incredible.
Like hacking away at a, trying to get through, and then attacked by a snake, which clearly is a real snake. That's not CG snake. You know what I'm saying?
Are you saying for a fact, or are you just?
If that's a CG snake, that's the best CG snake I've ever seen. Because he reacted to it in a very, very real way. I mean, maybe it was a rubber snake that they CGified. I don't know. I thought it looked real to me.
Yeah. Just really impressive. I think that we all kind of saw it coming a little bit. Is my guess. Could we all predict that he was in some way responsible for Chadwick Boseman's character's death?
Oh yeah.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
I
think that was.
Yeah, you don't have that kind of reaction if you don't.
Definitely.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say that I don't know. I sort of admire the let's keep the older guys in in those flashbacks.
Yeah. Who are we fooling? Yeah.
I did, but I don't like the physicality. I don't have a problem with like that. I can suspend my disbelief for the physicality. The thing that actually was the hardest for me to deal with, and I can't decide if I admire it or if it's problematic, is the 60-year-old dudes idolizing the 20-year-old dude.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that was the hardest part of it, is seeing them put this guy on a pedestal. And I get it, like their young selves did, and he never got to age into 60, so we shouldn't see a 60-year-old version of him. It's just hard watching a bunch of 65-year-old guys standing around looking up to and idolizing and worshiping this supreme 20-year-old guy.
Right, because in general, 65-year-olds don't give a shit about 20-year-olds. Right?
Nor should they.
The 20-year-olds don't have a lot of wisdom. That they lack. So yeah, I understand that. You're right. That did create a little bit of cognitive dissonance for me as well.
Yeah.
I found it interesting that towards the end, they show a photo of these guys, with Chadwick, and they're all wearing wigs. You know, I don't know if
Well,
you
that
guys
is the
noticed it.
DH. That's the one DH
like-
shot.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the one DH shot. Like, well, if you had him wear like wigs and all during that photograph, why couldn't you do it during the action scenes? You know, like, well, just wearing a hat is not doing the trick. You know, like, wait a minute, they now DH the photo in a way, but you couldn't do it. You know, I didn't understand that logic.
Well, I think it's easy to DH for one image, but to DH for entire sequences probably would have cost more money, is my sense. But
I also don't I mean, I have a lot of sort of logic problems with the movie that might be just tiresome to step through. So we don't have to if you don't want to. But I do kind of want to. I don't know. I like the moment of finding the gun in the bag.
yeah,
The movie wants us to feel like it's this big moment, but I also feel like it's perfectly legitimate for a dude to bring a gun on that
How are
trip.
you going out there without a gun?
Yeah,
well,
I mean,
the thing for me is, why would they give the gun to Delroy Lindo, who's
yes,
clearly the
Right.
most unbalanced person?
it
on the
makes
trip?
no sense. It makes no sense. And then when the shit starts hitting the fan, and like we're gonna kill, we're all on board to just kill this. The first thing he says is like, "They know about the gold," and it's like they didn't until you said that. You know. It's that whole sequence to me just felt like I love the upping of the stakes, and the explosions from the mines were shocking, and I thought powerful, especially seeing that guy like still alive, and half of a person lying on the ground dying. That shook me, but I also felt like at a certain point, everyone except Delroy should be trying to de-escalate this process, and they all just kind of go along with it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What-
I'll say
what I
the
was
thing.
gonna
Sorry, go ahead, Wilson. Go ahead.
what I was gonna say, what I found kind of, we don't know. Does anyone know what time period this is? Because you have Clark Peters' character, and
It says today at the beginning of the movie.
because
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
like, so the woman that he had a child with, you know, you would think that okay, these guys have been waiting 40 years to go back, so that child should be in her 40s. She
Yeah.
looks somewhere between 20 and 30. You know,
yeah.
and obviously the woman wanted her to meet her father, because she could have just sent the girl away somewhere along, but she's like, no, she's home to introduce her. And it's sort of like, okay, so you finally speak to Clark Peters' character after 40 years, and she happens to know who the right connect is.
Yeah.
You know, so
And
it's
everybody's
sorta like,
fine with it.
you know, everybody's fine. Like, okay, so they did not talk to each other for a long time, and if so, she couldn't tell him over the phone. You know, she just had to wait. No, let me wait till he's here and not tell him he's a daughter.
And
Yeah.
while we're talking about logic problems, guys, I mean, the romance between Jonathan Majors and Melanie Thierry, or David and Hetty in the movie, I didn't really buy it. I mean, Jonathan Majors looks amazing in this movie. He looks super jacked. But you know, at one point she's like, "You're like, you disgust." She basically says to him, "You disgust me," because he's part of the group that's holding her hostage. And then later they kind of have a thing. You know, I don't know. That never really. It just doesn't seem plausible to me that would occur.
Yeah.
Right, right.
But anyway,
The other thing that really bothered me is the moment where we find the gold. Like I get the joke that he's going to poop and he finds the gold. Like, okay, it just felt like a pretty lazy way to find it. But then you're gonna swerve us and say, oh, the chest is empty, which feels like that should be the first thing you find. But the first thing we find is the empty chest, and then we find some gold, right? You don't find gold and then an empty chest and then more gold, right? That just feels weird to me. No,
well, I think we're
I
getting
agree.
increasingly more and more nitpicky as this goes
I
on.
know. I'm
But-
sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I include myself in that escalating description, Jeff. You know, one thing that we haven't mentioned actually is that Delroy Lindo's character is a Trump supporter.
Yeah, I
And
mentioned that straight
That
up.
sorry.
hat, man. That hat is
Yeah.
I
that hat is a
apologize.
character.
I apologize if I
Yeah.
missed that, Devindra.
Yeah.
But yeah, and not only that, but Spike Lee actually calls out in rather explicit fashion a black Trump supporter at an actual Trump rally in the archival footage he uses, which I'm just like,
Mhm.
I don't know. Not
Yeah.
exactly sure how I feel about that, but I did find this idea very compelling, that there is something about Trump that speaks to people, and I'm saying people like Delroy Lindo, but not just necessarily black people, people who feel like disenfranchised, right? Who feel like society has taken a lot away from them, right? And that like Trump is kind of empowering your baser instincts to take things back. And I thought that was a pretty compelling idea as portrayed by Delroy Lindo. This,
Right.
he's lost so much. He has basically murdered this guy who he really looked up to. The fact that he went to war has destroyed his relationship with everyone he loves, including his son. They have a very contentious relationship, and it's very clear he was not there for him. And so basically, like, America has taken so much from him, right? And his solution is, I'm gonna go with the guy that's gonna stick it to everyone else. Like, that's
Gonna
that's
go
the
with
solution.
the rich criminal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought that was it's definitely not something I've seen explored on film before at all. And I just think this movie is unique. It's ambitious, and it's over ambitious, and that's a downside. But the upside is, like, you're not going to see another movie like this year, and
That's true.
and I appreciate that. Wilson, curious what you thought of that part of Delroy Lindo's character.
That, like, it's kind of funny as we mentioned ambitious. Yeah, like Spike threw a lot in there. Especially per character. You have Clark Peters with the child by a prostitute. Who's making the connections. You've got Norm Lewis as a guy who's broke and really still has enough money to try to pay for all 4 of their trips. And then you have Delroy Lindo, who's everywhere. Who's mad at the world, and as you mentioned, is a Trump supporter, which is definitely you don't see that in movies. You won't see. I don't think anybody's going to make a movie with a black Trump supporter out there. And there was no way of defining that character. And then you have his son, who comes in, who's a school teacher, and he's had a wayward upbringing with his father, but still cares enough to go, leave his job and go all the way to Vietnam to find his father and take care of him, knowing his father is kind of losing his mind in there. And so, like, Delroy, in Defiant, and Spike must have had a field day in playing this character. Like, he just like, okay, we're gonna have him do this. Let's up the ante. Like, he is the guy who, you can see from the restaurant. He was like, don't touch me, don't look at me, don't talk to me. He's not racist, but the way he's been treated, he's just more comfortable with his own skin, with his own people, and at the same time, he wants to complete a mission. At the same time, he's also racked with guilt, for what happened with Chadwick. And it's interesting how, since we're talking spoilers here, how that's never came across to anybody else as to what really happened. Like, we in the audience see what happens, but they don't. So you never get that moment. Like, you think it will be predictable. We're like, oh, they're gonna find out that, either he's gonna tell them, it was a friendly fire. But it never came up, which was kind of like a plus to the movie, that, like, oh, we're not getting the answers. They're not going to find out, so again, it's all going back to Delroy's performance, and, he kept raising the button over and over again.
I have one more nitpick, if I may.
After that, very
There we
lovely,
go. Keep
after
it
that very
going.
lovely description of the film, Jeff's gonna chime in with another nitpick. Go ahead.
I know, beautiful story. I had nothing to add, so I'm going to change course entirely. It was a lovely thing to say. I also kind of bothered me how the movie sort of hand waves away the extraction of the remains. There's no mention of how they even did that. Like, that should be kind of a big deal. Right? We see this casket at the end with supposedly has the remains in it, but did they put the remains in their backpack?
Yeah, I guess they did. I guess
Right?
they
We
did.
don't know. We don't know how they did that.
I think they laid out the plan that they would call some organization, but I don't know if it was like, hey, come to this site and pick this up, or we'd bring it to them. But it seems easy enough for them to just bring it in the backpack. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but it
If you
feels
could bring
like
a
that's a
ton of gold, you could bring, whatever you find of your friend, unfortunately.
I don't know. It felt like a detail that could have borne fruit narratively, and also I was
Yeah.
curious about.
Yeah. Let me throw in not a nitpick here, but I do wonder, like, the wonder of Spike Lee's narrative powers. Like, sometimes I think he does overreach, but man, the scene with the mine, and then how it like instantly translates, like, turns into something completely different. Like
Which
how,
scene
like,
specifically are you talking about?
the scene where the son is standing on the mine
Oh yeah,
and they have to
incredible,
pull him off, like,
incredible.
incredible, and then flips, like, instantly flips to, oh, you're my hostages now.
Yeah.
Great
Yeah,
stuff, like,
yeah.
great stuff, like, it's that tonal shift which feels jarring, and it kind of it I feel like a lot of filmmakers would not try to pull something like that, but that is the risk you take sometimes with a Spike Lee movie, and I dig it. Like, I love that feeling in that ride.
Totally agree with you, but again, we literally go from the scene where it's all about tie them up, tie them up. I don't want to tie them up, tie them up. Cut. They're not tied up. They're walking free-handed. I'm like, what? What was all the business about tying them up? They're just walking along with us. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be like that, but for me, the movie felt like this 2.5 hour movie where there's like a 3.5 hour cut that feels better.
Yeah, yeah. This is basically a Netflix series that is either maybe a little too short.
Yeah, yeah. Or a movie that's too long, maybe. But
yeah.
The mindset. Yeah. So Wilson, there's your answer to the question. Is we need some white people to explain what the mines are. You see. Otherwise, they would have no idea what to do in that situation.
Yeah, like I said, when they showed up, you were like wondering, okay, where are we going with this? Like the two guys are obviously from Black Klansman. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give you your next. I'm going to put you in my next movie. Like Paul Walter Hauser barely spoke a word. He barely spoke a word. Like you said, the romance between Jonathan and the girl that seemed to be like, where are we going with this? This is not Miracle. Are you now the Derek Luke character from Miracle of St. Anna? It's like, do we need a romance here? It's like, no, like it was not necessary.
Yeah, I don't think they needed the romance, but man, it is. I do think those characters do serve a purpose, or at least Hetty does, because her family got rich off the war. She's from a warmongering family, and like this is how she is dealing with her guilt. And I think in many ways it's very stereotypical. Like it is very much the granola country white girl who's out there in other countries trying to fix things. Except in this case, I think maybe she has a certain moral balance she wants to correct, and I kind of understand that.
I want to shout out, and I'll link to this in the show notes, but the author and writer Viet Thanh Nguyen wrote he basically live tweeted his viewing of Da 5 Bloods, and it's very good. The Vietnamese perspective is also a very interesting one here, and there was one tweet in this that really kind of caught me. And he writes here, quote, Vietnamese soldiers getting killed. He's like reached the point of the movie where Vietnamese soldiers get killed. He says, quote, Vietnamese soldiers getting killed. Fuck. It's a movie, but it still hurts. That's our place in the American imagination. Tour guides, sidekicks, whores and lovers, bastard kids, the enemy getting wiped out facelessly. Does it matter if black guys are doing it? Question mark. End quote. And I thought I do think it's just a perspective worth considering is like the Vietnamese perspective in this movie. They do have like a good Vietnamese character and like bad Vietnamese characters, so there is like balance in that respect. But obviously, and I think that's actually part of the point of the movie too. To be honest with you, is that like even in this movie, which obviously considers the perspective of characters of ethnicities that we don't typically consider when we're looking at Vietnam War movies. Even in this movie, you could make the very plausible argument that the Vietnamese characters are marginalized in this, right?
Yeah, they're cannon fodder. I think that specific scene he was pointing to was the one where the Vietnamese soldiers were just like talking about life and like, wasn't it poetry? And like it was like something very, very mundane and very kind of sweet. and then our heroes come in and gun them down, murder them all. I don't like the point of that. Yeah, that's the point of the scene, is that these guys that you're following are doing very bad things, you know? So talk
And
about
what
Spike Lee being very on point, or at least very blunt about what he's saying. That was the point of that scene for sure.
it wasn't even just poetry. It was literally about coming home to their loved
Yes.
ones.
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
like poetry about returning home safely, and then they get slaughtered. So yeah,
Yep.
it was pretty intense.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, I would recommend reading the whole thread for another perspective on the movie. So as we're wrapping up here, the movie does end with an explicit reference or like tie-in to Black Lives Matter, which feels incredibly timely. I didn't really fully grasp like the plot machinations that happened. My sense was basically they were able to exfiltrate the money, the gold, right, and they like donated to good causes, pretty much, right? Like everyone got their share, and millions of the dollars worth of that money went to the Black Lives Matter movement as a kind of restorative kind of justice there. So yeah, I'm just curious if anyone has any thoughts on the end of the movie, or any closing thoughts about the Five Bloods overall.
Um,
Go ahead. Hello, Wilson? Did we lose Wilson?
No,
always weird.
Oh, you there?
I'm trying to. Here we go. Yes. What I'm saying, what I would say is, Spike always tries to end his films with some sort of message that you can walk away with. It's not just simple enough that they got to go, but he wants to leave you with a message that, that carries, just like he did with Black Klansmen, to hit you up with like, listen, whatever these guys went through, we're still going through it today. And reparations in a way, that's the key word, reparations, whether it was in Black Klansmen, and it's happening today. And maybe you have to look back at his previous films, whether it's in that includes Chirac and the others, to see if that's a growing trend that started either with Black Klansmen, or was it there before and we're just now noticing it. Um, he always wants to leave you with a message. He just doesn't want to end it. I remember going back to even She Hate Me, and sometimes, like the screenwriter of that, Michael Janae, he said, "Oh, I had my ending, but Spike, wanted to throw his ending, and he kind of said it where like Spike's not in your room. It's like, oh, so you guys probably differed on how you want it to end, you know." And Spike's on a roll right now, like he definitely wants to throw in um, his angle of how he sees things, and as he's talking about this movie, he's saying, listen, he grew up around Vietnam. He was 5 or 6 or 7, when these things were happening. I guess his only recollection is what he saw on TV. And so, through his age right now, you haven't seen a film with blacks in Vietnam. As it is right now, we can't find 20 legitimate. During Memorial Day weekend, I was trying to find what are the best Memorial Day films, war films that includes that's centered around black soldiers. It was a stretch just to find 10. You could barely find 20. Obviously we're thinking Tuskegee Airmen, Glory, just war films, but no one's done uh, black soldiers in Vietnam and what they went through, as 20-year-olds, and if you're still alive, you're in your 50s, no, 60s to 70s at this point right now. And so he wanted to give you that sort of recollection. And so this movie is meant for a lot of people, throwing in what's happening today reflects today's youth. And the story will reflect anybody 40 and over as far as what's going on. And we sometimes need this commercial film to remind us, what went down, even if some of the plot lines are pure fiction, but you get a because you reading about it in text or hearing about it doesn't give you any sort of clarity. And even if you see a film, you get an idea.
All right. Well, I think we can wrap it up there. But yeah, completely agree. There's very few movies like what you're describing, Wilson. And there's also
Yeah,
very few
yeah.
movies that are told from the Vietnamese point of view, which is another point of view that I think is this movie kind of raises as one that might be worth considering as well. For me, it did at least. So anyway, I think we can end it there. But that's going to bring us to the end of our review of The Five Bloods. You can watch it right now on Netflix. You can find more episodes of this podcast at /filmcast.com. Email us at /filmcast@gmail.com. Our theme song comes from AdamWarrock.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from filmmaker Kyle Hillinger. Check out his YouTube channel. This episode was edited by Beatty Zhang. Stay tuned to hear what we'll be discussing next week. In the meantime, Wilson Morales, where can people find your work on the internet?
You can find me over at blackfilm.com, and a lot of times you can see it you can hear what I have to say through Twitter as well as Instagram and Facebook using Black Film.
All right, check Wilson out at those locations. Devindra Hardawar, what about you?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at Devindra. I write about tech at Engadget.com, so check me out there. I'm also doing the Engadget podcast, so be sure to subscribe to that.
How about you, Jeff Kanata?
You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff Kanata, which is spelled with 2 N's and 1 T. I do a video game podcast called DLC. You can find that at 5by5.tv/DLC. I do a science comedy show called We Have Concerns, which you can find at wehaveconcerns.com. And I do a live play Dungeons and Dragons show called The Dungeon Run, which you can find anywhere you get podcasts by searching for The Dungeon Run. You can find it on YouTube by searching for The Dungeon Run, or you can watch live Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific time at caffeine.tv/The Dungeon Run.
And check out my other podcast, Culturally Relevant, at culturallyrelevantshow.com. I also just launched a new podcast called Truth versus Hollywood with Fiona Robinson, where I'm evaluating 6 movies based on real life stories, talk about why and how they differ from their real life events. Check that out. Culturally Relevant, Truth versus Hollywood, wherever podcasts can be downloaded. Next week, it's currently looking like we're going to be reviewing Shirley, which is right now on Hulu. It's the new movie about Shirley Jackson, starring Elizabeth Moss, directed by Josephine Decker. So the movie Shirley is on Hulu. Check that out. That is currently the plan for what we're reviewing next week. I'm excited. So that's going to bring us into this week's episode. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. All right, Wilson, don't hang up.
Woo!
I'm just going to stop.
All right. Thanks, man.
Wilson, are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay, cool.
By the way, I saw The Old Guard. You need to check it out. It's pretty good.
All right.
The Old Guard, you said?
Yeah, the film that's going to be on Netflix, directed by Gina Prince Bywood, starring Charlize Theron.
Oh, yeah. That was on our
We're going to
list.
review that probably in July.
Yeah.
In July, though.
Yeah, they've already started sending out screeners.
Oh, nice.
Oh, boy.
Nice.
Okay.
All right, cool.
All right. I'm all set. All right. Thanks, guys.
Jeff, do
All
you
right.
have what you need?
I do indeed. Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
Wilson and Devindra, thank you. Be well.
All right, so
you.
what
Have
am
a
I
good
doing?
night, guys.
Anything?
Yeah, you can close your window. You're
You're
all
good.
good.
You're all
You're good.
done. Thank you
have
so much, Wilson.
automatically.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for inviting me.
Yeah.
No problem, man.
Great to have you on.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Devindra, thanks.
Yep. Good luck. I'm moving later. All.
Yeah.
Later.
Good luck.
All right, Kanata,
Bye,
it's
miss.
just you and me.
Yeah, buddy. Let's start. It's not going to last long.
What do you mean?
I don't have much to talk about. Let's see what.
Don't worry, dude. Don't worry. We'll figure things out to talk about.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about your current situation?
We can.
We don't have to. We don't have to.
I don't care.
Okay.
I mean, whatever you want. I don't know. Whatever you want.
Did you see that email about VR we got earlier?
About what?
VR.
No. Let me look.
I think that's a great one.
Okay. How do you find the things that you watched on my list? Is that my list? No.
You got to go to account history.
Count. Wait. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Hang on. I gotta
sorry.
record again. Wait, please wait until health checks are completed. Hang on.
I will.
3, 2.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I am David Chen, and joining me today is,
Jeff Kanata.
and it's just me and Jeff today for
Hey!
now. For now, we got Devindra and Wilson Morales joining us later for our review of the Five Bloods today. But Devindra's in the process of moving across the country, and
Yeah,
it's
no joke.
extremely busy for him, and so he wanted to sit out the rest of the podcast. Which is fine with us because that means it's time to talk about Devindra Hardawar. No, I'm just joking. We wish him the best on his move and hope that he and his family are doing well, getting ready to go leave the big city. But you can find more episodes of this podcast at slashfilmcast.com. You can email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. We're going to be discussing some of your emails today and then diving into what we've been watching. Got some short what we've been watching for you, and then reviewing Spike Lee's new Netflix movie, The Five Bloods, again with Wilson Morales from blackfilm.com. So that's what's in store for you today on the podcast. Let's start by talking about some emails. Okay, this email comes in from someone named True No Limit. Please use a real name, even if it's a pseudonym, guys. But True No Limit writes into slashfilmcast@gmail.com. Hey,
How is that not a pseudonym?
It's well, I mean, like at least use
My name is True No Limit.
at least use a name that sounds like it could be a real name. You know what I'm saying? You know,
Just
That's
are you saying lie to me? Is that what you're saying? Just lie to me?
just lie to me. Let me pretend that it's a real human connection I'm making. Okay?
I think Mr. and Mrs. Limit, if I may, Truno, is very much a real person.
True No Limit writes into slashfilmcast@gmail.com. Hey, Slashfilmcast, this email is long overdue, but I've had a question for all you guys since I first heard you bemoaning the possible death of the movie theater experience. Actually, in my opinion, the death of the movie theater is inevitable as technology gets better and cheaper. Anyway, my question is, have any of you tried watching a movie using some sort of VR Google experience? I myself own the PSVR, and when I play a 2D movie, it's like I'm in a theater looking at an IMAX screen. That coupled with some sort of Atomos headset would probably be better than any movie-going experience you've had.
Did you say Atomos?
I think so, yeah.
Atmos?
Or
Isn't it-
Atmos. Sorry.
It's okay.
Before you, to be fair, True No Limit misspelled Atmos in here, so that's why he spelled it as Atoms, and so I'm like, oh, True No Limit means Atomos.
You're really throwing Truno under the bus on this one, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had to explain why I would make such an egregious mistake. Anyway, he says, he or she continues, before you say, but the crowd engagement is part of the experience I cherish, you would maybe add a Zoom-like thing to the VR movie-going experience. Keep doing what you guys do. Sincerely, True No Limit. All right, so let's talk about watching a movie in VR.
Yeah.
And I'll just say that I recently acquired an Oculus Head. I'm sorry. Oculus Quest headset. I meant to say Oculus Quest headset, not Oculus Head. It's really all over the place today, Jeff.
Yeah, I hear that.
And I have really been enjoying using it. And one thing I've done is there's like a screening room app called Big Screen where you can kind of congregate with friends and like watch movie trailers and TV shows in a virtual space together. And I want to hear what your thoughts are because I know they're going to be highly positive, but I have thoughts to share as well. So let's start with you. What are your thoughts on virtually watching movies?
No, it's not highly positive. It's still not there yet. Because unfortunately, the way headsets are right now, they are pretty low resolution because there has to be 2 screens, one for each eye, and we are not yet at 4K in each eye. When we get to 4K in each eye, I think it's going to be an extraordinary experience. I actually tried, you can watch 3D Blu-rays in PlayStation VR or in Oculus in 3D, which I don't have a 3D television anymore, but I do have the 3D Blu-ray of Avatar and The Hobbit, but also Avatar. Anyway, so I've tried that, and it actually is pretty cool. The 3D effect. Have you tried a 3D movie in VR?
No, I haven't done that yet.
It's pretty cool. It is, I think, better than watching a 3D movie in a 3D movie theater.
I agree. I've watched 3D trailers before.
Yeah,
which are pretty cool. Yeah,
it's extraordinary. Yeah, so I mean, it really is like wearing the best 3D glasses ever. No movie theater is going to have 3D glasses that are as refined and give you that kind of experience. It's pretty cool. So in that sense, yes, but we're just not there yet for high definition video in VR. Even live events, I've watched a number of live events, which is cool in one sense because of how it feels to be able to look around wherever you want at a basketball game or a WWE event, or even there's the Saturday Night Live, I think 45th anniversary or 40th anniversary, whatever it was, is pretty cool because you look around in the audience and it's all famous people and they don't know they're being filmed because they think they're just in the audience, but there's a 360-degree camera filming them and you can watch their reactions to things, which is pretty great. Have you seen the Cirque du Soleil video in VR yet?
No.
Oh, you have to try that. You will, I think, be impressed with what they did with Cirque du Soleil. It's basically all around you, and it's made for VR. It's not like they set up a camera in a Cirque du Soleil tent or anything. It's performers doing this specifically choreographed for a VR headset, and they're all around you. You can look all around, and it's pretty intense. It's really cool. But I assume you are not very high on the idea of watching a film yet in VR.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd be interested to check out that Cirque du Soleil thing. Do you remember what it's called? Do I just search for
You can
Cirque du
Google
Soleil?
Cirque du Soleil VR. There's only one of them to my knowledge, so yeah, I don't think it'll be hard to find.
So here are my thoughts on Oculus Quest. Overall, I really like it. And for those who don't know what Oculus Quest is, it is, I would say, probably the most accessible version of VR that exists today right now. Like consumer accessible, right? In the sense that it's relatively cheap. You only need spend $400. I know that's still quite a lot, but like compared to buying a PC and then buying like a $600 headset, it's like one of the cheapest options there is. And it still delivers like a really pretty good overall VR experience. You can play games on it. You can watch Netflix on it. I think it's a great product. So I have no regrets about my Oculus Quest purchase. One downside of the Oculus Quest, like sometimes when I'm playing Beat Saber, which is an amazing VR game, the headset will get what some people online describe as soggy. Because like that, the headset is not supposed to, is not designed to be water resistant. So I had to acquire like a silicone sleeve for it, so it wouldn't be completely smelly and disgusting the entire time.
You're saying because he sweats a lot playing Beat Saber, as one does.
Yeah.
I do too. My wife once told me as I was playing Beat Saber that I was only allowed to play it if there was a towel down on the floor. So
I wish I'd known that before I sweat like a gallon into the headset already.
Yeah.
But what's done is done. So really enjoying the overall Quest experience. And hey, if you're interested in doing some Quest games, feel free to hit me up. I'm at Dave Chensky, which is the same.
Are you talking to me or the audience?
Both you and the audience. I actually looked for you on there. I couldn't find you, Jeff.
What?
Yeah. So
I'm there, bro.
Send me a friend request. Anyway.
I will.
Okay.
Let me also. I don't know if you're changing topics away from VR, but I would also recommend.
No.
I don't know if you've.
I was about to dive into my thoughts on this.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead. Yes.
So, the question of whether to watch movies in VR. In my opinion, okay. So one of the problems with Oculus Quest is it is relatively low resolution, right? Compared to, I think you have the Vive Pro, right? That's like the highest.
No, I have
Yeah.
the Index, which
yeah, the
is
Index, which is
currently-
like literally the highest end one you can buy.
well,
from
there's
a
there's the
consumer yeah, go ahead.
yeah the what is it called, the PMax or
Yeah.
Pimax or something like that. There's like is literally the highest of the high end. But yeah, the Index is high
It's up
end
at
for
top five
Yes,
in terms
for
of how
sure.
like premium it is, basically, right?
Yeah.
And I assume that is higher resolution than the Oculus Quest.
it is.
And so, the Oculus Quest is basically like an Android phone, strapped into a headset, basically, right? So what I'm saying is the most accessible version of VR, aka the Oculus Quest, or one of the most accessible versions, you're still getting not even 4K. I would love, 2K or whatever, like something that's really close to 4K, but it's like it's really not even close to that as far as I can tell. It's still very, very pixelated.
Well, the problem is the way the tech works. I mean, I'm sure people know this already, but is you're looking at lenses, which are then looking at screens, so they're literally amplifying the screen. It's like you're
Yeah.
seeing a magnified version of the screen. So and you're very close to it. So any gap in the pixel density is magnified and seems more problematic to the eye.
Yeah, people call it the screen door effect, basically.
Yeah.
Right? You look like you're looking at things through a screen door. And so from a resolution perspective, it fails the test of, is this better than actually going to a movie theater? Right there, okay?
Yeah.
The second problem is the Oculus Quest headset weighs, I think, a little bit over a pound. One pound or so. Let me see. I can look it up right now. The Oculus Quest, 20 ounces. So like 1.25 pounds. And it is not like balanced on your head particularly well from my perspective. And I have a rather large skull. And so it kind of sits awkwardly on top of my head, and it pulls down on like the back of my neck because it's very front loaded. And it just I cannot use it for more than 30 minutes without getting really sore.
I wish we were living in times where you could come over to my house.
Yeah.
Because the Index is so much more comfortable. So much more comfortable. I don't really have a problem with the Quest. I find it to be, it's certainly more comfortable than the original Rift was, and way more comfortable than the original Vive was. But the Index has really is a quantum leap in terms of comfort level.
Yeah.
I find I played Half-Life Alyx in very long sessions in the Index and never ever felt discomfort or and I would. I mean, I played long sessions in my original Oculus Rift and would end up pulling it off and having, red marks on my nose and stuff like that. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. So those are the two reasons. It's just like resolution and comfort, I think, prevent this from being a replacement for the movie theater experience. But the concept is amazing because you put on the mask and you put on the headset and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm in like my own private screening room right now. And the screen is huge, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh man, if this was just higher resolution, if it was a little more comfortable, I could really see myself being like drawn into this illusion. But it's not there yet, at least at a relatively low price point.
Right? It will be. It will be. I mean, in just a few years, we will have those two things completely solved.
I hope so.
I believe it. Yeah.
All right.
But let me just say one more thing. The thing
yeah.
I was going to bring up earlier is another thing I would recommend if you haven't checked out already. There are a number of very, very high quality short films, a lot of them animated short films in VR that you can download that are very inexpensive and highly worth it, I think. Really impressive experience. There's one company in particular called Baobab Studios that has released, I think, 5 or 6 of them. There's one called The Crow or Crow the Legend, which features the vocal stylings of John Legend, both as a voice of a character and as his original song, I think, in it as well. But the thing that's amazing about these shorts is that they were made for VR. So I think you would be impressed with the use of VR. It's not literally just watching a screen that's giant in front of you. It is an experience that takes place all around you that's almost completely non-interactive, but transportive. You are inside a Pixar cartoon or something, and your view is guided by certain things, and you're asked to turn around or look up or look down or whatever it is. I was blown away by a lot of these. They're quite good.
All right. Can you repeat that again, Jeff, for people who want to find it?
Crow the Legend is one. There's the follow-up to that was Bonfire. They did one called Invasion, which was, I think, a launch piece of software that came out with the Oculus. They're all, I think, worthwhile. Very cool.
All right. Let's move on to another email. This one comes in from Vishal S, who writes into /filmcast@gmail.com. Now, before I read this email, I want to set some context for everyone. The Last of Us Part 2 has just been released for PlayStation 5. This is going to be one of the biggest video games of the year. And was one of my most hotly anticipated video games, probably of all time. I thought The Last of Us Part 1 was a masterpiece. Last of Us Part 1 is a zombie apocalypse stealth shooter that came out 7 years ago. And in my opinion, is one of the best video games of all time. It sold 13 million copies. And Last of Us Part 2 just came out this past Friday. And I have a lot of stuff to say. I think like Jeff and I are probably going to put together something about this game. I'm probably going to make a YouTube video about this game. I have a lot to say about it. I've already beat the 25-hour campaign in the time that since it came out, which was last Friday. So I really just took it all in, and I have a bunch to say about it. And you can listen to Jeff talk about it on DLC, the podcast.
I think maybe we'll have Dave on DLC to talk about this too.
I think it's probably going to happen. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, so all that is context for this email. But just before I read this email, I also want to say we are not going to spoil Last of Us 2 in this podcast. So don't worry, we're not going to say anything about the plot. Okay. This comes in from Vishal from Berkeley, who writes in, this has been a long-standing problem of mine, but has recently become extra relevant due to the release of The Last of Us Part 2. As you can probably relate, I am reasonably averse to spoilers in my day-to-day media consumption. I enjoy not knowing where the plot of the movie or TV show is going to take me. Therefore, for movies or TV shows I care about not being spoiled, I try to consume the content as quickly as possible to avoid spoilers on the internet. This works great for movies, as it's a 2 to 3 hour time investment. I could just drive to a local theater back when those were a thing and watch the movie. However, for video games that have 20 plus hours of gameplay, such as The Last of Us 2, I feel left in a quandary. I would prefer to enjoy something as well crafted as Last of Us or God of War, like a fine wine, and savor the gameplay and spread my playtime out over several weeks. However, to avoid spoilers on the internet, I feel like I'm forced to play through the game as quickly as possible so I can get to the end to avoid being spoiled. Currently, Twitter feels like a minefield for Last of Us 2 spoilers. How do you all handle this? That email comes in from Vishal from Berkeley. And I really relate to this problem, Jeff Kanata.
Yeah.
Because Last of Us 2, for those who don't know, has a very engrossing story, right? And it's one of the few games, in my opinion, that has a truly cinematic, enthralling story that would not feel out of place in a movie. And there's a reason why it's one of the few video games, I should say, that is currently in development as I think it's a HBO series.
HBO
right?
series, yeah. The first game, yeah.
And so, in many games like Qbert, who gives a shit what the plot is? But for Last of Us,
great timely reference there, Dave.
That's my last video game knowledge before Last of Us Part 2 is Qbert.
Well, no wonder you were so blown away by it. It really felt like a leap forward.
It's like a massive leap forward. Last of Us 2 from Qbert. But anyway, The Last of Us 2 is one of the co-writers worked on Westworld season 1. It's it has amazing voice acting and motion capture. So truly a immersive cinematic experience.
I'm told though you're not supposed to compare video games to movies. This is what I've been told.
This is what literally everyone on the internet is trying to tell you, Jeff. But
yeah,
I think that here's the problem, and also compounding this for Last of Us Part 2 is that I think a month ago, a massive leak took place where many cutscenes from the game were leaked onto the internet, revealing crucial plot details from the game. And so not only do you have to deal with the fact that a month ago there's a whole news cycle around Last of Us Part 2, but also people have finished the game now because the game is out already. And you need to deal with the fact that people finish the game and they want to talk about it. So unfortunately, Vaishal, for me personally, that was my solution, was to just marathon this shit as quickly as possible. Like people were stunned at how quickly I completed this game because I just didn't want it to be. I did not want to be spoiled. I played this game so much since its release that like my neck hurt because I was like sitting in my chair in a way that was like slightly positioning my neck for discomfort, and so I was like sore for like a day or two after I finished it because I just stayed in the same position for 12 hours in a day. And yeah, so that's my solution is I I played the whole thing in one sitting. That's my solution for avoiding spoilers. Now, that arguably created misery of a different kind, of the muscular kind, and other kinds.
And maybe, do you feel like compressing the experience into that short period made it less enjoyable in any way?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some movies where if you marathon it / binge it in one setting, you enjoy it less than if you stretch it out. And there's some where if you spread them out,
talking about TV shows? You said movies.
Sorry, TV shows. Yeah. Sorry, I apologize. So let me give a few examples of that. Like, I would say, Westworld season 1. If you marathon that, I think you're gonna have a better time than if you watch it week to week. But like Law and Order, maybe like if you marathon it, you start to see like how it's extremely similar, and the formula, and you start to see the Matrix, right? So that maybe you don't want to binge 30 episodes of that in a row. Last of Us Part 2 falls into the latter category, in my opinion, in the sense that taking it all in at once is not the ideal way to enjoy it. Because a lot of the game is very, very similar to previous portions of the game. And so you really, really start to see, the puppet master at work. So all that said, Jeff, you generally get games in advance, so you don't even need to. You're the one that's doing the spoiling, if anyone, right?
I guess, yeah. I mean, in this case, that certainly was nice. Sony provided copies to reviewers very early because they knew that it was a long game and they wanted to give everyone plenty of time, which I really appreciate. It's all too rare for that to happen. Oftentimes you'll get a review copy like 2 days before it comes out and they're like, go for it. But I mean, I certainly am in a very privileged position that way. But I'm sensitive to this idea. And I think, like you said, Last of Us is one of the few games that I wouldn't want spoiled. Like as spoiler averse as I am, everyone knows listening to the show, I am. Video games tend not to be on that list of things that I get really worried about. I watch video game trailers and stuff because video games tend not to matter when it comes to narrative. It doesn't ever really elevate to the point of the narrative was what I'm coming for. Not the case here. Not the case with any Naughty Dog game. Naughty Dog is creating cinematic games who tell you a story that is every bit as good as other mediums, which is a point I tried to make. But but I also feel like it's not that hard to avoid spoilers on the internet. I don't know. I guess I'm just not looking at places that a lot of people are looking at or doing things that a lot of people are looking at to do. But I always take the onus on myself. And I don't, when the leaks happened for Last of Us Part 2, I definitely didn't want to know them. And I didn't. I didn't have a problem not seeing that stuff. So
so I actually don't know that it's easy to avoid. So someone in the chat room, we're broadcasting this live, just like dropped the Last of Us spoiler right into the chat with no warning, right?
Yeah,
and
not cool.
So it's like, okay, sometimes that can happen to you, it's like a random freak accident. But I would say for me, one of the ways I avoid it is I don't follow people who would spoil things like that.
Right.
Or I mute people or I block people who would spoil things like that. And that is something that has been I've pruned down my list of people I follow over the years so that I don't follow anyone who would retweet that into my timeline. but that takes a
Yeah.
lot of work, right? That's not necessarily for everyone, but that is my solution to that. Is I also was really nervous about the leaks, but I follow people like Jeff Kanata, and I know Jeff is not going to like spoil the leak for me, right?
Right.
You're not going to drop a spoiler for the leak unilaterally, and I follow people like Jeff who understand that and are considerate of that. So I agree with you. It is possible to avoid stuff like that online. I wouldn't say it's easy. It takes time and effort to.
It does take
some
time
of
and
it,
effort, and it's precarious. You can get screwed by people who
Yeah.
are not nice.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of not nice people. It turns out.
Yeah, I remember when I was hosting Cast of Kings podcast, the Game of Thrones podcast with John Robbins. Like, people used to drive by, DM me spoilers because there's like, I haven't read the books and my co-host has, and that's the whole premise of the show. And people would DM me spoilers for Game of Thrones, just to like mess with me. And
Yeah.
so you have to work at it. You have to block people liberally who do that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, I think saying this as someone who freaking marathoned the game in like the first 48 hours of its release, you have to try not to take it that seriously.
Well, I mean,
you have to be okay with the fact that you might get spoiled, because otherwise you're just not going to enjoy life as much.
Yeah, I mean, I relate to it in the sense of TV shows, because there's just no universe where a new season of a show comes out and I'm among the first people to watch all of it. It's just not how my life is structured. I have kids, I have a wife. 9 times out of 10, if the thing I want to watch, well, 9 times out of 10, the thing I want to watch, my wife also wants to watch. So it requires us syncing up. And usually that means maybe an hour or two a night to watch something. So I'm not the guy who's going to sit there and watch, 10 episodes in 2 days. It's just not going to happen. And I've just kind of come to peace with that and tried to stay away from, people who would mess that up for me.
Yeah. All that said, obviously I took it really seriously. It's just like, no one is I have waited this long to not be spoiled. No one is messing up this experience for me. And
The other thing I think of that is a whole other discussion that we don't really have time for, but I often think of, 7 years for this game to follow up its sequel. Obviously, Naughty Dog not working on it that entire time, but probably a good portion of that time. Hundreds and hundreds of man hours it represents of work.
yes, person hours. Yep.
Indeed. And then you just like fucking shove it down your throat as fast as you can. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I
There's
do
something, I don't know, there's something weird about that too, where it's like, well, I got to be on to the next thing next week. It's like people worked for years agonizing over tiny decisions and putting placing an object in a scene that you're just like sprinting through. There's, especially this game, there's so much attention to detail in the world. Every single place is just exquisitely rendered with the highest fidelity, thought through. It is communicating something in every location. And people worked on this for many, many hours, worked in the creation of it, in the realization of it, in the audio, in the visual, every like costume, every aspect of this thing was just agonized over. And you're like, I gotta get it into me as fast as I can, and I move on to the next thing. It's just kind of crazy. And it works. That's the same for movies and TV shows too. It's like, next week we'll be talking about something completely else. It's very strange to me.
I think you're having what's called an existential crisis, Jeff.
Well, that's for sure. I've been having a prolonged one for the last 4 years.
So anyway, those are our thoughts on consuming a game like The Last of Us 2 extremely quickly. And overall, I'll just say I didn't care for it, Jeff.
I know. We'll talk about it at length.
I'd give it like a 6 out of 10 is what I would say.
Yeah.
But so it wasn't like with no redeeming qualities, but not a huge fan of the game. And I will be publishing content on YouTube, and we'll probably be doing some podcasting with Jeff about it. So keep an eye out for that. Follow us on Twitter to make sure you don't miss that. All right, Jeff. Well, as I predicted, we did have plenty to talk about prior to our review with Devindra and Wilson of Defy Blood. So we have just a couple of what we've been watching. So why don't we toss these off real quick? Okay, let's just nail these real quick. So I had a chance to watch Baby Teeth, which is a movie that came out as a premium release this week. And this is out right now. You can like rent it for $7. I will read the plot summary from IMDb. This movie is written by Rita Calnages and directed by Shannon Murphy. The plot summary is: Milla, a seriously ill teenager, falls in love with a drug dealer, Moses, her parents' worst nightmare. This movie stars Eliza Scanlon, Toby Wallace, and also Ben Mendelsohn and Essie Davis, who are great, talented Australian actors. I thought this movie was pretty good, Jeff, but it falls into this category, this subgenre. You know how there's like all these things that you would not think would become subgenres are now subgenres of movies. I'll give you an example. Groundhog Day movies. You know, like movies where time resets itself. If you ask me to say what you listed all the genres in the world, you're like, or all the movies in the world, you're like, which one of these, you know, is going to inspire an entire genre of movie? You know, I wouldn't have said Groundhog Day, or you know, Live, Die, Repeat, or something like that. But anyway, so
But you love this because it allows you to do your letterbox very specific subgenre titling.
Yeah, it's true. I would have no letterbox career without this kind of thing. Anyway, the subgenre that Baby Teeth falls into is movies that are about a girl or woman's relationship with a guy who is terrible for her and also a drug user. And I watched another movie that fell into this category recently. It's called The Souvenir, widely regarded as one of the best films of last year. And I definitely respect these movies, and I understand people really love them. I think this movie has like over 90% Rotten Tomatoes, and the craft is great, and the actors are great. But it's just not my taste of movie. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not the movie I would choose to watch left up to my own devices, and that's completely fine. But you know, that's just the way it is. I'll say that this one, Baby Teeth, is really well made. And again, this has Ben Mendelsohn playing the least psychologically disturbed character I've seen him play, which is...
Well, that's not saying much.
It's not saying much. And he plays the father of a dying girl in this movie. So, you know, this is the least psychologically... But he is awesome in this. He is so good in this movie.
He's always awesome.
Eliza Scanlon, who plays the lead, is great as well, and a revelation, in my opinion. But the girl is dating like a Jesse Pinkman type character. Picture Jesse Pinkman, but at the worst part of his drug addiction and without the ability to cook meth. That's who she's dating, right? And so it's like
it's Jesse Pinkman without the income,
without the income, right? Without the skill or talent or income. And when I watch these movies, I just get so infuriated at how shitty these guys are, you know. And I know that's part of the point. I know that the point is you're saying like, hey, what is it that would cause someone to be in this relationship or want this relationship with this extremely shitty guy? I get that that's like part of the appeal of the movie like this, but for me, that anger kind of overshadows any other feelings I have about the movie. So
yeah.
Anyway, that said, it's a really well done movie. Pretty well done movie. Prepare to be completely devastated if you watch this. I was not ready to be completely destroyed in the way that I was when I watched this movie.
I think that anytime you told me you were watching a movie entitled Baby Teeth, not gonna feel like it's gonna be the feel-good hit of the summer. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's really revealing your bias against Baby Teeth, Jeff.
As someone who has both babies and teeth, there's nothing pleasant about a baby with teeth. Nothing pleasant about a baby with teeth. It causes them anguish coming in. They bite
anguish
you.
coming out. Right?
Yes, it's anguish all the way around. Baby teeth are bad.
Yeah, actually, you know, I never thought about it that way, Jeff. But now that you mention it, the warning signs were all there in the title. All right, Jeff, what have you watched this week?
Oh, I just wanted to mention another stand-up special that I enjoy. We talk a lot about stand-up specials here on the show. I think you and I both enjoy a great stand-up special, and I am ashamed to say I had never heard of the stand-up before watching it. It was one of those Netflix presented to me as a, hey, this is new and interesting, and you know, I still have the preview on Netflix, the little auto run preview thing, which I use almost exclusively for stand-up specials. I love getting like 2 jokes and going, I'm gonna watch this, and that is what I did for Taylor Tomlinson's new special, Quarter Life Crisis. My wife and I both really, really enjoyed this. She is great. She's very, very funny, and I highly recommend it. I can't believe she's so young. She's very insightful and very funny, and I just loved it. I thought it was really good. Taylor
Cool.
Tomlinson, Quarter Life Crisis.
Find it on Netflix right now. All right, we got to get to our review. Before we do that, we got to thank all the people who donated to the podcast. Thanks to Rex Chen and Dylan Foreman. And also, we got this email and donation from Brianna, who writes in, "First, I want to thank you for all the joy your work has brought me and my brother for many years now. We're always excited to listen to an episode after we've had a lively debate about a movie to see which one of us has a better opinion, based on whatever Devindra says, obviously."
What?
I mean, I should just stop reading this email now.
Yeah, we literally have no reason to read this right now.
I'm glad Devindra is not here to hear this. Anyway, in all seriousness, I deeply appreciate the unique perspectives and passion for movies you all bring to the show. I also wanted to reach out because my brother is turning 30 at the end of the month, and I was hoping you could help to make it a special day by sharing a short birthday message on your next episode. Here is the message. Happy 30th birthday, Julian. Thanks for being the world's greatest movie buddy. Love, your favorite sister.
Aw, Julian, happy 30th. Wow.
What a lovely sister you have who was willing to make a donation to get you a birthday shout out. That's awesome. And by the
Yeah.
way, we've gotten a few requests for shout outs, and in general, I just say if you want a shout out, literally just donate any amount to the podcast.
Yeah,
Like,
give us
there's-
money.
there's
Give us
no-
money. We'll shout out.
But
You know,
there's no like minimum. There's no like you need.
there's
to donate
also no
$5.
maximum.
That's
No
true.
maximum.
It's true. It's true. There's no minimum or maximum. But of course, you should never donate if it any way causes you any hardship or detracts from any other donations you want to make to other places that might be more worthy. If you want to throw some cash our way, though, you can go to paypal.me/filmcast. That's paypal.me/the-word-filmcast. You can also use the /filmcast tab on the /film.com website. Use the PayPal links on the side of the page. And if you want to support us for free, just go to the iTunes podcast, the Apple Podcast page. Leave us a review, star rating. It's free. Takes a few seconds. It really helps us out. All right, let's get to our review of The Five Bloods featuring Devindra Hardawar and Wilson Morales. End recording, Jeff?
Yeah, I did. Sorry to rush